Chapter 8. The Last Bullfight. 4 days later, the applause was building at the Plaza de Toros in Mexico City. The great matador Carmen del Junco waved hello to her fans as red roses flew from the stands to dot the ground at her feet. An announcer's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Y bienvenido, Stanley Lano. That's me, Flat Stanley, realized Stanley. He was stationed behind a wooden slat door at one end of the ring. He put on his biggest grin, pushed open the door, and trotted out. The crowd leaped to its feet. Carmen took his hand, and Stanley gave a dramatic bow. In his new satin spandex jumpsuit, he looked like a giant piece of shiny red paper folding itself in half. You know, it is a myth about bulls in the color red, Carmen had said when she presented the outfit to him as a present. Bulls can't see different colors at all. It is movement that makes them charge. Carmen now took Stanley's other hand as the bull rushed into the ring. A hush fell over the crowd as everyone took their seats. Carmen winked at Stanley just as she had before rescuing him on the steps of the Mayan temple. Then she grasped his other hand, lifted him off the ground, and gave him a little shake. The bull did not look very happy to see Stanley. Its muscles rippled, its hooves thundered in clouds of dust. Stanley gulped and squeezed his eyes shut. Suddenly, a hysterical shriek pierced the air. "Stop that bull!" "I know that scream," thought Stanley. He opened one eye. With a shrug, Carmen calmly lifted him onto her shoulders and stepped aside to let the bull pass. "You keep that bull away from my son Stanley!" And then Stanley saw. His family was in the front row. Mrs. Lambchop was standing on top of a seat, waving her hands like a trapped octopus. Everyone in the arena was staring at her. Arthur looked the most horrified of all. "Mom? Dad? Arthur?" said Stanley. "What are you doing here?" "You think you can go away for a whole week without calling?" cried Mrs. Lambchop. "Your mother is right, son," Mr. Lambchop said. "We were worried about you." Carmen shuffled slightly to let the bull pass again. "Of course we were worried," Mrs. Lambchop cried. "Our boy Stanley is about to get gored by a bull." Arthur rolled his eyes. "Well, I think what you're doing is neat, Stanley," he said. "Thanks, Arthur," said Stanley. It was sure good to see his brother. "Mom, is it okay if I finish just this one bullfight?" said Stanley. "Please?" "Yeah, Mom, please," chimed Arthur. "I promise, Senora Lambchop," said Carmen. "I will keep Stanley safe. He is a very special boy." Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop exchanged looks. Then slowly, Stanley's mother climbed off her chair and sat down. A few moments later, Stanley's toes lightly brushed the bull's back as it rushed beneath him. He squeezed Carmen's hands joyously. Everyone in the stands went wild, even Mrs. Lambchop. "Stay back, Matador," cried Carlos. He was standing on Stanley's bed, holding Stanley by the feet like a giant knife and swinging him at Arthur, who stood a few feet back on the floor. "Or I will chop you in half like an onion with the flat American." "Oh yeah, Mr. Big Chef," said Arthur. He grabbed Stanley's hands and tugged. "Ow!" said Stanley. "I will never let you beat me," cried Carlos, tugging back. "Never!" "That's what you think," challenged Arthur. "Arthur," Mr. Lambchop appeared in the doorway. "Haven't I told you no playing tug of war in the house? You're going to stretch out your brother." Arthur rolled his eyes. "We're not having a tug of war, Dad. We're playing chef and bullfighter." "Well, that's good," said Mr. Lambchop, "because I've just received our photographs from Mexico." He flipped through the pile in his hand and held up one so the boys could see. It was Stanley being swung through the air by Carmen del Junco as an enormous bull passed inches beneath him. "Whoa," Carlos said. "I told you it was cool," said Arthur. Stanley felt his cheeks turning red. He went over to his bulletin board. He pinned the photo right next to a piece of paper on which he had written, "The secret is not the ingredient. It is what you do with it." Stanley smiled. He felt as if he could still hear La Abuela's laugh. He could still feel the grasp of Carmen's hands. He could still smell the secret ingredient. In fact, it was as if that smell was wafting down the hall and into his room. "Lunchtime," Mrs. Lambchop called. Stanley, Arthur, Carlos, and Mr. Lambchop stampeded for the kitchen. Well, I hope you enjoyed Flat Stanley's adventure. And I hope you also think about places you would like to go for an adventure and what you would like to do with what you have been given. Thanks for joining me. Goodbye.